Welcome to Demolition Success Secrets, the podcast that's changing the game for demolition businesses everywhere. Ever wondered how a wrecking ball wielding industry can leverage digital marketing to dominate their market? Well, we've got the blueprints, strategies, expert guests, and more to show you how. Stay tuned, because we're about to blast through the barriers of your business.
Alrighty, gang. We have a really awesome episode lined up for you. This is Chris, all the way out there in Colorado. Is that where you are today, right now?
That is. I'm here in Colorado, Denver area today. So.
Awesome. Mile high.
Yep.
So cool. Love it out there. Is it snowing right now, or it probably is in the back country?
We got a little snow last night, so coming off of some snow, just a little bit of fog today. So
cool. Well, I'm actually really interested. So we have a lot of guests that come on. The closest I could think of that's cold weather was New Jersey. We had just a few days ago. How does that incorporate with your business? The snow, the weather, how it affects your team members and things like that?
So I mean, it definitely does have some effect. We don't do a ton out in the weather, but it definitely can have an effect. Our business is primarily doing testing for asbestos, and so we do end up in the weather sometimes, and sometimes in the containments during post clearances. It can be pretty cold in there, and so that can be a little bit of an issue. But yeah, I mean, the weather can have an effect on it, but we work around it and make it work. So
yeah, just like anywhere else. I'm just thinking being out in the field sometimes. I don't know. I give you guys credit. I'm here in Florida, so snow is like an enemy to me. But yeah, feel free to tell us kind of what a day in the life is like out in the field for you and for the team and things.
yeah, so quite often we again, our company does asbestos testing out here in Colorado. Colorado is kind of a different state compared to a lot of other states, where we have a regulation that is pretty strict, run by the state health department, specifically for asbestos. And so it's beyond just the EPA, NESHAP, and that type of regulations. However, what we do end up doing out here does kind of end up being the same as other states as well. But it is, again, a little bit stricter, and there's a lot more enforcement out here from the state level as well. But so on our team, we end up going out and doing bulk sampling in homes or in businesses, schools as well. So taking samples before the demo is done, before the actual like drywall or any flooring or other type of samples or any removal is done. And then having that analyzed by the lab for the presence of asbestos. And then if there is asbestos, then an asbestos company that's separate from us, we do have to be third party in that aspect, is able to come out and take care of the removal portion. And then we are able to actually do the clearance on the back end. And we do have the ability to actually analyze samples and everything, even on site, and the air samples on site as well. So it's a pretty cool gig that we got going on, and it actually like works fairly well. And the here in Colorado, I originally started the business down in Phoenix, Arizona, and
yeah, I saw that on the Facebook. I was gonna touch on that a little bit. Love Arizona, way different than Colorado, but
definitely
very cool places, beautiful places, both of them.
Yeah. And again, that is definitely not it's a NESHAP state down there. NESHAP, again, is the EPA regulations that touch on asbestos, whereas Colorado, it falls under the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And so a little bit different. Again, just being that it's a lot more strict up here in Colorado. And so really for the business side of it, it's been helpful coming up here. And when we moved the business up here, a lot of the work that we were doing was actually working with other consulting firms like ours that had contracts with schools and doing kind of longer term projects. And in about the last year or so, I've been kind of shifting a little bit to work with smaller abatement companies, doing a lot more clearances and that type of stuff to be able to kind of level out that workflow a little bit, and level out the ups and downs with the big projects as well. So it's actually been a pretty good shift for the business, being able to do both sides of it. And then also what we're kind of focusing on going into the next year is picking up more of the building inspections, the actual like bulk sampling prior to demolition, and helping out with the restoration companies and the demolition companies prior to them going in and doing the demolition of the buildings as well. So.
It's cool. So you have a lot of friends in the demo space, and they love you guys too. I know some of them, maybe not in your backyard, but some of them, they do have abatement and asbestos within their own companies. How often is that a thing? Do you know? I've never actually asked the guests that. The odds that they do all of it versus they usually just have a friend, a trusted partner who does it externally.
It kind of depends. There's not really necessarily a conflict of interest on that side of it. Again, here in Colorado, the testing side, it is required that the testing company and the actual abatement company be third party from each other, that they can't be the same company. However, a demolition and an abatement, they could be under the same roof. And I've definitely seen some of the bigger companies and some of the companies that are up and rising kind of do both. And some of the smaller companies will kind of pick one side or the other. But the bigger companies will have kind of under the same roof, they'll be able to do both of them as well. So.
Cool. So for prospects or new customers, things of that nature, are you mainly getting from businesses like demo companies, or are you mainly getting from citizens or realtors, or I guess what is your mix of net new business? How does that break down?
Yeah, for the most part, it is through companies, through like restoration companies, abatement companies, and demolition companies. Yeah, we haven't done a whole lot of marketing towards like just the homeowners or anything like that, really. We may do a little bit of that, but the thing that I notice is with a homeowner, and similar to like a water damage restoration type situation, like we may be able to do an asbestos sample in their house like once or twice in the time that they live there, but we were able to like work with the contractor. We can do multiple jobs for them over and over and over again over the life of that relationship with them. And so we really build that relationship with the contractor rather than just directly with that homeowner most of the time. So
yeah, that's very smart. It's like you want something that's residual and repeat, like Starbucks model, right? Like you typically aren't going to get coffee once. You're going to come every day or multiple times a week or something. So for you guys, you're choosing the business to business versus the business to consumer. Very cool. Okay, so the perhaps the big companies in your space, you know, the big behemoths, do they do both B2B and B2C, or do they as well kind of focus more on the B2B because of the residual aspect?
A lot of them will do more of the B2B, and even a lot of them will do get like government contracts as well. And so it will even just business to business, they'll end up in at the government contract side. And so
B2G.
yeah,
They're lobbying on Capitol Hill, like work with us, going to the governor's office and stuff.
Yeah, so they'll end up with the contracts with the schools and on the military bases and that type of stuff as well. So
Okay. Do you have a lot to thank? This may sound crazy, but I used to go to the North Georgia mountains a lot, and there is a city called Helen. Are you familiar with Helen, Georgia?
I am not very familiar.
It's okay to not be. That's fine. It was really cool. Frankly, it was kind of corny, but it was like a German village in the North Georgia mountains. Something to totally Google. Like, you go up in the mountains and all you see is Bavarian style. Like, you think you hit your head and you woke up in Germany, even though you're in the US. And why I'm saying maybe to thank them is they used to be an asbestos town. They had asbestos caves and mines and things of that nature. And that was how they made their boom. They had an asbestos boom and they were doing great for, I believe, a few decades. And then obviously the carcinogen effect. And they said, hey, we're either going to become a ghost town or we have to do something. And a lot of the guys who were there had come back from the war and they said, well, we miss the beer. We miss Germany somewhat. We love America, but like, how cool would it be to make this a tourist town? Yeah. So really, really weird, really like interesting bit of history with the asbestos is Helen, Georgia. Cool to go visit. Used to be an asbestos town. And yeah, they probably brought a lot of asbestos throughout the country that is still now pesky and obviously helps for your business. You guys can take care and, you know, do effectively the reporting on it and stuff. So yeah, what are the exciting things in the pipeline for the industry or for the business that you're in?
So it's an old business, an old industry that hasn't changed in a long time. So like the most recent change here in Colorado, they did a change in 2021. There was a change to the regulation, and actually like made it a little more strict on a few things. But really on like a national level, a lot of stuff hasn't changed since pretty much the 90s or early to mid 2000s. And so it doesn't change a whole lot, and it takes a really long time for anything to change at all. However, I guess some of the kind of misconceptions that can come up is that you know, asbestos has never been fully banned in the United States, and so it is something that can still show up and really should be tested for on prior to demolition on any building, on every building that's being demoed. And part of the reason why we moved the business to Colorado was that was always a very strict, hard, fast rule here in Colorado, that regardless of the year of the build, and regardless of whether it was a house or a commercial building, the testing had to be done prior to demolition or renovation being started. Whereas in Arizona, a lot of the work that we were doing was water damage restoration work, which was very insurance driven, and it was really hard to be able to get any testing past 1980 build, especially in homes. And that is something, from my understanding, like within the ICRC S500, that has changed in the last couple of years, that they have updated it, that, you know, regardless of the year, yeah, it does need the testing, and so that has been written into the S500. However, at that time, back in 2020, when we had moved here, I was looking at it, I'm like, hey, I'm missing out on 40 years of houses here that I could be testing. And so this is a good time to make that shift. And so it's something that's important to understand, that asbestos is it's still around. It still can show up. It's not. It's less likely to show up past the 1980s. However, it still can show up in materials. And it is something that again, on the national level, you have different, the EPA is really what as the regulation for the national level, and that's the NESHAP, and so they don't really specifically regulate like within residences, within homes specifically. There's some caveats with that, but generally they don't. However, OSHA, they do when we as commercially are in there working in these homes, and so that they don't really care what year it was built. We need to be protecting our people, and so being able to know that there is or isn't asbestos in there, really we have to assume that it is unless we actually test the materials. And so that's something that's important to be able to understand within the demolition space, within the renovation space, that before we go clearing out materials, that we need to make sure that there is an asbestos present, and that as again, to do that, we need to have it tested before we move forward. And depending upon where you are working, there's different laws with that. Here in Colorado, it is required that a Colorado certified asbestos building inspector do the inspection. In other areas, it can be just an AHERA building inspector, and so it kind of just depends on where you're at, depends on the state you're in, and so something to do a little research on, but just being aware that that again, it's not like the fast cutoff of like 1980. That's not like a true thing, unfortunately. Asbestos never has been outlawed. There are some things that were, but it's not like a full broad spectrum outline of any asbestos in every single type of building material out there. Excuse me.
That's fascinating. I'm shocked. I never knew that. I really didn't. I would assume, yeah, as you're referencing that, maybe most people in the general public would have thought it was. I assume you would say it should be, or is there a stance in general that most people like yourself have?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it would be wonderful if they did like pass laws to outlaw it here in the United States. And I'm not entirely sure why they haven't. Some of the stuff that they did outlaw in like late 80s, early 90s were some of the like worst stuff, some of the fireproofing and that type of stuff that's a lot more like easily airborne and that type of stuff that's a little more dangerous. However, again, it can still, like, we can still find it in building materials today. When I actually took my first building inspector class back in 2014, the building inspector teacher that was teaching the course, he had a company going, and so with really how it all started, the whole industry started was the U.S. government was having issues with, okay, kids and teachers are getting sick in schools, and so we need to be able to protect our kids and protect our teachers from asbestos. And so the HERA is what started that, and so they formed a HERA, which is it focuses on schools, and this was back in the 1970s is when that started. And so that when they started that, one way to be able to, like, part of it is that every school had to have an inspection of the entire school, of all the building materials inside the school, to determine if there was asbestos, what condition it's in, all that type of stuff, if it needs to be removed, if it needs to be protected, and then every 3 years that has to be re-inspected and make sure that it's still in good condition, or if it needs to be removed, replaced, whatever, at that 3 year mark. And so there's an option for like newer schools to be able to opt out of that whole regulation. And the way to do that is to have like an engineer or a testing company sign off on all the materials that go through and go into the building as non-asbestos containing materials. And so his company, again, this was back in like 2014-ish, was hired for this new school in Arizona that was being built. And so they were like, okay, we want this like stamp of approval that we have no asbestos in our building, so we don't have to go through this whole process every 3 years. And so they hired his company to test every single building material that went into that building. And of all the building materials that went through there, he said there were 16 of the building materials that came back positive for asbestos. And again, in 2014. And wow. So they had to go back and find other materials to be able to put into that building. So like I said, unfortunately, it's a lot less common than it was back in the 50s and the 60s and 70s. However, it still shows up in materials today. So
that's crazy. Now, do you guys obviously you're not going to consumers much, but you go to businesses. Tell maybe the audience some of your secrets of how to really network effectively business to business, because I know in the demolition space, there's a number of people they should be speaking with. Of course, someone like yourself, in certain cases, realtors, investors, general contractors, developers, etc. But what have you guys found well for yourself or your team to effectively, consistently work on those relationships, finding them, maintaining them?
Yeah. So I think a couple different ways. One has been being able to like kind of work with the network that I have. One was like being on LinkedIn, reaching out to people directly on like messaging them and like having like kind of starting some conversations directly with some of the different people. And then being able to like go and do the work. And I think what we've been able to do, how we've really been able to build the business up here, is that we show up, we have a good product, we do the work, we show up on time when we tell them that we're going to be there. We have a really good product that we do, or well, it's really a service that we do. And we get them the report really quick. We have a good pricing for them, and we have a real good open communication with them. And then we build a good relationship and a good rapport with them. And then also I think part of it as well is that we also build a good relationship with their workers as well, because oftentimes we are dealing more with their workers than more of the higher ups in the office and whatnot. And so we treat their workers well, we treat everybody really well. And so we just kind of are able to do that, and then they keep coming back, and then they refer us to other people. And so a lot of word of mouth has been happening. And then the other thing as well is that we've been like working with some of the larger companies that will have subs like on the jobs that we're at, and say we're doing a clearance at a job, and like, hey, you're a sub, who, like, let's talk, like, let's sit down and have lunch, and then start building that relationship with them. And so who else do you guys sub for, and start kind of networking out beyond that as well. And so kind of looking at that avenue as well. And one of the things as well with our and actually just recently I brought on a salesperson in the last few months, and
cool.
One of the things he's been kind of focusing on is like going and talking to the companies, and say we go and talk to an abatement company, and they'll say, okay, well, if we talk to the abatement company, well, then who are they getting their work from? Because if they're just doing the abatement, then they're getting work from other demolition companies, or they're getting work from restoration companies or contractors. And so then as we go out and start doing good work for them and improving our skills and our abilities with them, and then after building that relationship with them, going back to them and saying, hey, is there anybody we can, like, that you could refer us to, or that we can have a warm handoff to, like, some of your people that you're working with, that you're getting work from, that we could benefit them as well. And it works out quite well, being that, you know, we're not at all in competition with them, because we're not doing the work that they're doing. We're just doing the testing, and we've proven that we do have a good service. We build a good relationship with them, and they feel comfortable being able to, you know, pass this on to somebody else as well. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it kind of seems like sometimes people get concerned about overlaps, or, you know, we compete, when it's like, hey, honestly, even if they are competition, you guys could probably find a way to work together. I used this corny example the other day in an episode, but it's like having gears, like you're both gears, but if you go like this and you kind of figure it out, then you could actually, you know, move and can go forward, rather than being like, oh, we're both gears and hitting each other. Usually there's things that you guys can do. Someone does a big project, you guys do smaller, vice versa. Or let me ask you this: out of town, what sort of radius do you guys maintain? Are you willing to go pretty far out, or you're staying pretty close to home?
Yeah, I mean, we go wherever the work takes us. So we'll go as far as we need to. But yeah, I mean, a lot of work is kind of in the Denver area, but we definitely do branch out farther than that. But yeah, I mean, to your point as well, we definitely do work quite a bit with the competition. And I mean, there's I don't know, a couple of seasons ago, I even like sent out a postcard to all of my competition saying, hey, let's work together. And I got a handful of companies that reached out, and I actually have built some pretty good relationships with a handful of them. And actually, some of them I end up doing quite a bit of work with them directly, where either overflow or I'm actually on one of them where we actually do a lot of work for them, where they had some people that had left, and so we're, as posted, like, it's kind of hard, again, being able to hire and then once you hire, there's kind of a process to be able to get somebody up to speed within the industry here, because unless somebody is already like has all the certifications, it takes a few months to actually get them to the point where they're able to like really sit a job by themselves. And so this company, they had a few of their key people leave, and so we've been filling in on some of these jobs for them. And so they're still bringing jobs in, and they're like, hey, can you fill in? We're like, cool, we're good. And so it's, you know, definitely being able to build that relationship. And on the other side as well, being able to, you know, I feel like there's so much work to be able to go around that it's not like, oh, I need to have all this, it has to be all mine. Like, there's enough to share. And then, like, along those lines as well, within the state of Colorado, so there's a couple different certifications, and one of them that's specific to Colorado is called the Air Monitoring Specialist, or AMS. And that one is, once you take the class, which is like a 4-day class, you actually have to do 80 hours of air monitoring and 6 clearances, and they have to be all permanent jobs and all this stuff. And so it actually takes, like, if everything, all the stars align, you could probably do it in about a month, but really it's like months or more. There are some like companies and stuff out there that, like, they have technicians that have been doing it for a couple of years and still haven't gotten that requirement settled and everything. And so like, I am happy to work with these companies and stuff if I'm able to get on these jobs, like being able to help them out. And so I've actually built some pretty good relationships with other companies, again, my competition, quote unquote, doing that, helping them out. And, you know, they're throwing me jobs, and we're growing the businesses together by doing it. So, you know, not being scared of working with the competition has definitely been a helpful thing for our company. And being able to kind of see past that barrier, I think has been really helpful too. So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, a lot of people, it's so funny. They have like there's abundance in the market and they know that, but they still have a scarcity mentality. So it's like, if there is true abundance out there, let's be honest, if you've been in business for years, you have a team, you guys are doing some real stuff, it's okay. Like you could let go of the scarcity mentality. And ironically, when you do that, you'll attract more. So yeah, you could work together. What would you say for demo companies you wish that they knew about your line of work? Like what are some things that they should really be aware of and maybe give extra respect or time to you guys or credit to you guys, how important you are to their world?
So I think sometimes there's like a couple things, and some of it like I guess so I guess here's an example would be like being aware of the just that kind of the importance of the work and of the that we're here, we're on your team, we're here to try and help and make sure that everybody's safe, and we're not just like trying to be like just a pain in the ass. We're here to like help keep everybody safe, and then also keep everybody like the regulations. Here in Colorado, like it gets like fines are a thing here. Like it's not a joke. And unfortunately, if you get the cart in front of the horse, it can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars out here. And it's like not even and like on the cheap end, like really. And so it's not a laughing matter, unfortunately. So yeah, I've unfortunately been on a few places where some people have knocked down houses before they got the testing done, and then the state's gotten involved, and they have levied fines, and then they have to come out and do what they call an asbestos spill cleanup, and again on the low end, you're talking $100,000. Fines are the fines out here, and I mean it's kind of EPA as well, but they actually do levy them here, or $25,000 a day per action, and so again that adds up really fast. so spending a few $100s or a couple $1,000s to have it tested, and then a few $1,000s to have it actually abated properly before you go on and do the demolition is definitely worth it on the back end, for keeping the business and everything rolling. So, and then I think just a little bit of patience on some of it. Like one example would be here in Colorado, and I think in a lot of areas as well. But in the summertime, when schools let out, it's a really busy time for the asbestos industry in general. Because schools are out, and so they need to tear up the floor or whatever they're doing to start doing the remodel process. And so the asbestos guys, the asbestos abatement companies are in there first doing the job to get it like taken care of, so that way they can start doing the remodeling behind it. And so it's always, the schools always want to do 10 projects when really the time and everything affords for like 7 or something. So it's always a push. And the abatement, and then again, we kind of get wrapped in there as well because we're up on that front end, are always getting pushed on time to get it all done. And so sometimes just being aware that like we're doing it as quick as we can, but we still got to do it right. And then also if there's like stuff going on around the containment, like the containment itself can be completely perfect and flawless, But if there's demolition and dirt going on, or like dust going on around the containment while we're trying to do a clearance, that can actually get sucked into the containment and cause the containment to fail, which can like put us back again a few days. And so being aware that like we may need to stop what's going on outside for a little bit so we can keep the project moving forward on a timely manner. That's one thing, again, we've run into where I've been on some schools where they're actually demoing the building and they're like, we need to get into this spot where the abatement guys are at. And I'm like, okay, well, you're like 15 feet away from where I'm trying to clear and like demoing the building out. And like, I can't like honestly clear this. And because I'm like, yeah, it's like they're done and it's clean inside. But if I run my air samples in there, because it's under negative pressure, and so it's pulling outside air into the containment. And so if we do that, it's going to pull the fibers and stuff from outside, from that building coming down outside into that containment and cause that to fail. And then the construction company gets mad at the abatement company. And so it just becomes a whole circle. And I'm like, if we just pause for a couple hours so we can just run this clearance, then you get this part back and everything moves forward. So yeah, just having a little bit of patience and understanding, like we're out here, we're all on the same team, we're trying to like get it done with you as quick as possible, but there is a process to it, and we can't just shortchange it as well. So.
Right. Yeah, it's not magic. You guys have people keeping an eye on you. Obviously, I can't believe the fines you're talking about, how much those were. They have people putting eyes on them. Okay. How hard is it for companies to notice it? I know obviously it's a material, it's fibrous and things, but would you see, obviously some people, they just don't care or they're willing to take the risk, but do you think there's times where they just legitimately overlook it by accident or something of that nature?
So like the asbestos itself or the...
Mm-hmm.
So asbestos is so small that the only way to see it is like having it analyzed by a lab with a microscope. And so
Okay.
really the only way to know that it's there is to have it tested by a microscope. And so actually like the regulations, how they're written is, and especially like with schools and in Colorado, and really it's written that you have to assume that it's there unless you prove that it's not.
Interesting.
Where you prove that it's not is tested and analyzed by a lab to have it tested. And so that's the way that you prove that it's not there. And so that's one thing to kind of understand, is that you can assume it's there and just go and have it all abated, but really, I mean, obviously that'll be a lot more expensive than having it tested to show that it's not there, and then going forward with a regular demolition that it's not. So yeah, and I mean, there's some products that are that can be like over time you can like kind of start seeing and be like, oh yeah, that's like pretty well like 99% like for sure that's asbestos. Like transite paneling, some of the transite ductworks and stuff like that. A lot of like acoustic sealing or like popcorn sealing textures and stuff like that would often have it. But it doesn't automatically mean that it does or it doesn't. Again, having it tested and analyzed by a lab is the only way to know for sure that it doesn't.
Okay. Yeah, I've never run into asbestos, but I've seen all those pictures, I guess. And some people, like the contractors and things, I would think most demo owners are going to be pretty familiar with the processes. But, excuse me, maybe newer team members, newer contractors, things like that, they'll be like me, never having run into it, looking on Google and going, they're showing all these pictures. It looks like a fiber. It looks like, these various different things. Meanwhile, you're making me realize those are hyper zoomed in photos.
Yeah, that's probably like under a microscope. Yeah, like looking through the microscope lens on that. So yeah, and I mean it
Okay.
could even be like, I mean there's some again, asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral, and so it could be like in the natural form, it could be a big chunk of asbestos, you know, out in nature, it could be a chunk of the asbestos that's there, and it is very fibrous and that type of stuff. But what we'll see it in the building materials, it would be like very very small at that point where we would end up running into it. So
Okay. So always assume that it could be there, particularly in a state like Colorado.
correct.
Again, I'm thinking more for people like myself, who they may be. I've been in the field with my clients. Asbestos has never come up, but what about states that aren't like Colorado? They're not as intensive. I'm thinking. I have plenty of clients in Georgia, clients in Texas, Alabama, you know, places like that. How do they go into a demo? Are they, because you're not able to see it, are they just inherently going in and saying, hey, we need to get this whole place tested prior to doing anything? Like, what is the normal, maybe non-Colorado or even inclusive of Colorado approach? It's always to get stuff tested before they're going to do much work.
Yeah, so in general, it should be tested, especially if you're getting into commercial systems. It definitely should be tested. Again, the NESHAP or the EPA doesn't really touch residences. That does in some cases, but in general, it doesn't. So residential dwellings, Colorado, it does. They do. EPA doesn't really. However, again, OSHA, they do. They don't really stipulate whether it is a residence or not. They don't really care. It's you need to protect your worker from asbestos, right? And so, and to be able to do that, we need to show that there is an asbestos there. And so, really, my recommendation is that we have everything tested before we start tearing into building materials. The general EPA regulations for square footage is 160 square feet. If we're disturbing anything over that, it becomes regulated or under the NESHAP regulation, or 260 linear feet. Here in Colorado, at a commercial space, it is still that 160, 260. Within a residence and like a single family home, it's actually 32 square feet and 50 linear feet. And so that's like a sheet of drywall, right? And so if anybody was like taking out a sheet of drywall, like you need to be testing that. It's regulated within a house. So
man, that's great for you. That's fantastic for you.
So,
okay. That's fascinating. You may have covered this, and I may have possibly, you know, just missed it, but why in Colorado so specifically? Why so heavily? Are they the most heavily in the country for what you do? Was there a particular incident or series of incidents that caused them to be so focused on this particular issue?
I'm not entirely sure why Colorado is so specific about this, but the EPA kind of designates different like states to be able to do different like kind of run their asbestos program a little bit.
Sure.
And so I believe there's, and I'm maybe wrong, but I think there's 14 states that have kind of their own asbestos program, including Colorado. I believe Texas and California are two other ones as well. There's, like I said, I believe 14 total in the United States. The rest are under EPA, and then they usually will designate the state to be able to kind of run that as well. So, for example, in Arizona, most of Arizona is under the county of Maricopa County has their
Mm.
inspectors that run the EPA program there. And so that I'm not entirely sure why Colorado decided, you know what, we're going to be running this really strict the way we do. But they did. And so they decided this is what they're going to do, and that's how they did it. And again, with like the way regulations are set up, the federal regulations are the bare minimum, right? And then states can go beyond that, like more strict if they desire. And I mean, they have to like kind of work with the US government to like approve it and that type of stuff. So they can't go completely off the rails, but once they get that approval and stuff, then they can move forward. And but they can't go like more lenient than like the US government regulations. So and so that's one, like, again, where Colorado's been able to like say, okay, we'll meet you at EPA. And then like, again, with like the single family residence, they're like, we're going to up that and like go into the single family residence as well. Again, I did a little bit of work in Texas, and I think they have a very similar type of thing as well, where they do regulate in some way residences as well in Texas. So
That's fascinating. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's kind of reminding me a little bit of like getting a permit. You know, some people, oh, permits are the worst, but we need them, but we don't, but we need a, you know, like that kind of back and forth where it's great for the city, for the county, for whomever, you know, for the permit process and, you know, making sure everything is above board. Like at the end of the day, this is a net positive. Yeah. And it just could be like you explained it. Some people see it as, oh, this is a barrier, this is an obstacle. And it's like, hey, look, this is a neighborhood. We're going to have some speed bumps. Okay. I'm sorry. There's 2 speed bumps in the neighborhood, but we have kids and people, you know, from time to time, we're doing 100 miles an hour down the road. So got to put a little speed bumps here. It's for the better. Okay. Well, we're about to cap off the podcast, but do you have, I'm going to ask 2 questions effectively. Most fun story of your business, craziest incident, or it doesn't have to be good or bad. It could be however, but maybe the most memorable incident in your business. And then lastly, any last things for, you know, our viewers in the demolition space or tangentially through the industries. So yeah, let's start with your craziest story. If you could even think of one. I'm sure your business, it has some interesting stuff occasionally.
Yeah. So the craziest story.
It's like there's so many.
Yeah,
how long do you have?
Let's see. I think let's see. That probably the craziest. I mean, you run into a handful of different things. I mean, being out in the field, you run into different scenarios quite often.
Maybe like a hoarder's house or you know, a collector. They have an amazing garage of exotic cars or something that you guys had to come in and check the garage, or anything that's a little different that maybe non people in your world would be surprised by or curious.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. I'm kind of, well, I mean, I think one thing I've had, and it's a good possibility, and in this space, other people have had this experience before, and maybe a little more personal, where I've like called up and, hey, just checking in on going to be going out to this clearance. They're like, oh, sorry, we actually gonna have to push that back because our guys got in a fight inside the containment.
Oh.
I had to like call off the job for today. So we'll have to do that tomorrow, you know. So I've actually had a few of those incidents before where we're like, okay, no worries, you know. And so obviously the boss is feeling really bad about that, but I'm like, it is what it is, you know. It's just kind of, you get some hot heads in there sometimes, and so but yeah.
All that asbestos they're taking in, they're a little upset.
Yeah.
They're a little angry at each other.
Breathing through their respirator, and somebody told them something wrong. So
That's crazy. Okay, well, that's a good one. Any kind of last few things that you want to make, the guests, or excuse me, the audience aware of? Obviously, feel free to promote your business and let people know how they can reach out to you guys as well.
yeah, so I would just say again, regardless of where you're at, I would say build a relationship with a testing company for like doing asbestos testing, being aware of your regulations in the state you live in will definitely help keep you protected. And really, before you go out and start demoing stuff, make sure that there's not asbestos in there. And really, the only way to do that is by having it tested. And again, sometimes, depending upon the state you're in, you might even be able to get the certification pretty quick and easy to do it yourself. And again, if you're here in Colorado, we're with White Hat Services. You can definitely reach out to us. Our website's whitehatcolorado.com, and you can get our information from there. And again, we provide front-end testing as well as clearances for the back-end testing. Beyond just the asbestos side, we also do mold testing, and we're also adding lead testing, and early next year we should be adding that end of it as well. So
super cool. Yeah, one-stop shop. That's amazing. Cool. All righty. Well, that caps off the podcast, guys. Thank you for another episode, and thank you to you, Chris.
Great, thank you.
That's a wrap for this episode of Demolition Success Secrets. Stay tuned and subscribe for more explosive insights from our upcoming episodes. Until then, continue to blow up your demolition business and make the competition rubble in your path.